Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I never thought I'd be sharing this story. Mostly because admitting it means confronting a level of naivete I'm not particularly proud of. I was fresh out of a long-term relationship, convinced I was ready to dive back into the dating pool, armed with a shiny new Tinder profile and a whole lot of misplaced optimism. I'd heard the horror stories, of course. Everyone has. But I figured I'm smart, I'm cautious. It won't happen to me. Famous last words, right? My profile was pretty standard. A few flattering, but not overly posed, photos, a witty bio that hinted at my love for travel and disdain for pineapple on pizza. I swiped with abandon, matching with a handful of guys who seemed relatively normal. There was the finance bro who only talked about his investments, the aspiring musician who sent me a song he wrote. It was not good. And then there was Liam. Liam's profile stood out. He was a photographer. His photos were genuinely beautiful, landscapes, portraits, candid shots of city life. His bio was simple but intriguing, chasing light and capturing moments. He seemed artistic, introspective, and, let's be honest, incredibly attractive. We matched, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He wasn't pushy or overtly sexual. He asked about my interests, my job, my favorite authors. It felt like an actual conversation, not just a thinly veiled attempt to get me into bed. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet for coffee. I hesitated for a moment, that little voice of caution whispering in the back of my mind. But he seemed so genuine, so unlike the other guys I'd been talking to. I told a friend where I was going, shared Liam's profile, and agreed to meet him at a cafe near my apartment. The coffee date went perfectly. He was even more charming in person, with a warm smile and an easy laugh. We talked for hours about photography, travel, our families, our dreams for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I found myself completely captivated by him. He walked me home, and we shared a brief, sweet kiss at my doorstep. I went inside feeling giddy, convinced that I had finally found someone special. We went on a few more dates over the next couple of weeks. He took me to art galleries, hidden parks, and a quirky little bookstore I'd never heard of. He always seemed to know the perfect spots, the hidden gems that only locals knew about. He was attentive, thoughtful, and incredibly romantic. I was falling hard, and I wasn't even trying to stop myself. Then, things started to get weird. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. He began asking more personal questions, probing into my past relationships, my insecurities, my deepest fears. At first, I brushed it off as him just trying to get to know me better, but the questions became increasingly intense, almost invasive. He also started showing up unannounced. He'd randomly appear outside my apartment building, claiming he was just in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello. He'd call me late at night, his voice thick with emotion, telling me how much he missed me and how he couldn't stop thinking about me. It was flattering at first, but it quickly became overwhelming. The photography sessions also took a strange turn. He started asking me to model for him, wanting to capture my raw, natural beauty. I agreed, figuring it would be a fun experience. But the sessions became increasingly uncomfortable. He'd direct me into strange poses, often in secluded locations, and his compliments started to feel less like praise and more like something else. He wanted to capture something beyond the surface, something darker, more vulnerable. I felt like he was trying to see through me, to expose something hidden inside. One evening, he invited me to his apartment for dinner. I was hesitant, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or distrustful. I told myself I was being silly, that I was letting my past relationship insecurities cloud my judgment. So I agreed. His apartment was located in a run-down building on the outskirts of the city. It was dimly lit, sparsely furnished, and had a strange, musty smell. He explained that he was in the process of renovating, but something about the place felt unsettling. We ate dinner, a simple pasta dish he'd prepared himself. The conversation was strained. He kept staring at me, his eyes intense and unblinking. I tried to make small talk, but he seemed distracted, like he was waiting for something to happen. After dinner, He suggested we look at some of his photography. He led me to a small room that served as a studio. The walls were covered in photos, mostly portraits of women. As I looked closer, I noticed something disturbing. The women in the photos all had the same vacant, hollow look in their eyes. They looked broken. Then I saw it. A photo of me. It was a photo he'd taken during one of our modeling sessions, but it was different. In this photo, my eyes were empty, devoid of any emotion. It was like he'd captured my soul and drained it away. I froze, a wave of nausea washing over me. I turned to face him, my voice trembling. "What is this, Liam?" He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile. "I told you, I'm capturing moments." "But why this? Why me?" He stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "Because you're special. You have something that the others don't. A vulnerability, a darkness that I can capture." I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I'm just trying to reveal your true self." I panicked. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight. I screamed, but the sound was muffled by the thick walls of the apartment. I knew I was in serious danger. In a desperate attempt to escape, I kicked him in the shin. He yelped in pain and loosened his grip. I pulled away and ran towards the door, fumbling with the lock. He lunged at me, but I managed to open the door and stumble out into the hallway. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the street. I flagged down a taxi and told the driver to take me to the nearest police station. I spent hours at the police station, recounting my story to the officers. They took my statement and promised to investigate. They went to Liam's apartment, but he was gone. He'd packed up everything and disappeared, leaving no trace behind. The police launched a search, but they never found him. He was like a ghost, vanished into thin air. I was traumatized. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I moved apartments, changed my phone number, and deleted all my social media accounts. I went to therapy, trying to process what had happened and rebuild my shattered sense of trust. It's been years since that night, but I still think about Liam. I wonder where he is, what he's doing, who his next victim will be. I know I was lucky to escape, but the experience has left me scarred. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more cautious now. I do extensive background checks, meet in public places, and always trust my gut. I know that not everyone on Tinder is a predator, but I also know that danger can lurk behind the most charming profiles. I'm sharing this story because I want other women to be aware of the risks. Be careful who you trust, listen to your instincts, and never let anyone pressure you into doing something that makes you uncomfortable. It's okay to be cautious, it's okay to say no, and it's okay to prioritize your safety above all else. Tinder, or any other online dating app, should not be a game. It is a place to meet and socialize with others, but you are also making yourself open to predators. If you meet a person who is too good to be true, they probably are. And always tell a friend where you are. And never, ever trust an artistic profile that seems way too deep. They may be artistic, but not in a way that is safe. All right, buckle up. This happened last summer, and I still get a shiver down my spine when I think about it. I wasn't looking for love, or even anything close to it. Just a bit of harmless fun, you know. Tinder was my go-to for that. Swipe, chat, maybe meet for a drink if the vibes were right. Rinse and repeat. Most guys were either boring, overly aggressive, or just plain weird. But then came Liam. His profile was pretty standard, a few decent-looking photos, a witty bio about enjoying hiking and craft beer. He seemed normal enough. We matched, exchanged a few messages, and he actually seemed interesting. He wasn't pushy. He asked genuine questions, and he had a good sense of humor. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for a hike. I know. Meeting a stranger from Tinder in the middle of the woods probably wasn't the smartest idea, but he seemed so normal, and I am usually pretty good at reading people. Plus, it was a popular trail, broad daylight. What could go wrong? Famous last words, right? The hike started out great. Liam was even more charming in person. He was cute, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything from our families to our favorite movies. The trail was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and for a brief moment, I actually thought, wow, maybe Tinder isn't so bad after all. We had been hiking for about an hour when he suggested we take a detour off the main trail. He said there was a hidden waterfall just a short distance away. I hesitated. I am usually pretty cautious about venturing off the beaten path with strangers, but he was so persuasive. He promised it was worth it, and I have always loved waterfalls. I relented. That was my first big mistake. The short distance turned out to be a lot longer than I expected. The terrain was rough, the path was overgrown, and I started to feel uneasy. I kept asking Liam how much further it was, but he just kept saying, "Almost there." Eventually, we reached the waterfall. It was pretty, I'll give him that. But by this point, I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. We were completely alone, surrounded by dense woods, and I realized I had no cell service. The charm Liam possessed seemed to have evaporated. He was quiet and unervingly observant, and it was like I was talking to a completely different person. I told him I wanted to head back, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the waterfall, with this strange, vacant expression on his face. I repeated myself, a little louder this time. Still nothing. My heart started to pound. I took a step towards him, and that's when he turned around. His eyes were different. They were cold, empty, and there was something unsettlingly predatory about his gaze. He didn't say a word, but his face was twisted into a strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. I knew, in that moment, that something was terribly wrong. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. I turned and bolted back in the direction we had come. I heard him start to follow me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I ran as fast as I could, dodging trees and leaping over rocks, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear him gaining on me, his breathing becoming heavier, closer. I tripped and fell, scraping my knees and hands. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, ignoring the pain. I could hear him yelling something behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. I burst back onto the main trail, breathless and terrified. There were other hikers nearby, and I ran towards them, screaming for help. Liam stopped chasing me. He just stood there, at the edge of the trail, watching me. I ran to a group of hikers and frantically told them what had happened. They looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. I pointed back towards the woods, but Liam was gone. I was panicking, trying to explain what had happened, but I was so shaken up that I could barely form a coherent sentence. One of the hikers, a kind-looking woman, offered me water and helped me calm down. She called the police, and I gave them a statement. They searched the area, but they couldn't find Liam. They said they would investigate, but I could tell they weren't taking me seriously. They probably thought I was just some hysterical girl who had gotten spooked on a hike. I went home that day feeling shaken to my core. I couldn't shake the image of Liam's face from my mind. His eyes haunted my dreams. I spent the next few days glued to my phone, waiting for the police to call. But they never did. I tried to find Liam on social media, but he was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished into thin air. A week later, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I started digging, scouring the internet for any information about Liam. I searched his name, his pictures, anything that could give me a clue. That's when I found it. A news article about a string of disappearances in a neighboring state. Young women, all around my age, had gone missing while hiking in similar areas. The police had no leads. Then I saw the sketch, a composite drawing of a suspect based on eyewitness accounts. It was Liam, or at least, it looked incredibly similar to him. The description matched too: tall, dark hair, charming demeanor. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew, with chilling certainty, that Liam was responsible for those disappearances. I immediately contacted the police in the neighboring state and told them everything I knew. I sent them the news article, the sketch, everything. They took my information seriously this time. They launched a full-scale investigation, and within a few weeks, they had tracked Liam down. He was living under an assumed name in a remote cabin in the woods. When they raided the cabin, they found evidence linking him to the disappearances. They also found a collection of disturbing items: photos of the missing women, journal entries detailing his twisted fantasies, and a lock of my hair. I almost threw up when I heard that. It turned out Liam wasn't just a weirdo from Tinder. He was a serial predator, a monster who had been preying on unsuspecting women for years. He was eventually charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and murder. The trial was a media circus. I had to testify, reliving the terrifying experience over and over again. It was awful, but I knew I had to do it. I owed it to the victims, to their families, to myself. Liam was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could finally put this nightmare behind me and move on with my life. But it wasn't. A few months after the trial, I started receiving letters. They were handwritten and signed, and filled with disturbing messages. The writer knew details about my life that only Liam could have known. They knew my address, my phone number, my daily routine. They knew things I had never told anyone. The letters made it clear that Liam was still obsessed with me, even from behind bars. He had somehow managed to contact someone on the outside, someone who was willing to carry out his twisted desires. I went back to the police, but they couldn't do much. They said there was no way to prove that Liam was behind the letters. They suggested I get a restraining order, but I knew that wouldn't stop him. He was a master manipulator, and he had people willing to do his bidding. I lived in constant fear, looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next letter would arrive. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and started carrying pepper spray everywhere I went. I felt like I was living in a horror movie. I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to disappear, to start over somewhere where Liam and his accomplice couldn't find me. I sold my apartment, quit my job, and moved to a different state. I changed my name, my phone number, everything. I cut off contact with everyone I knew. I became a ghost. It was a drastic measure, but I felt like I had no other choice. I needed to protect myself, to protect my sanity. It's been a year since I moved, and I haven't received any more letters. I still look over my shoulder all the time, but I'm hoping that I am finally safe. Tinder and other online dating sites are not worth the risk. I downloaded Tinder on a whim. Freshly single after a painfully long and boring relationship, I was itching for something, anything, to break the monotony. I wasn't looking for love, definitely not a husband, just maybe a few laughs, a distraction, and if I was lucky, a decent story to tell my friends. My profile was pretty standard, a couple of selfies, a full body shot from a hike, because everyone loves a girl who hikes, right? And a bio that said something witty about my love for pizza and bad puns. The usual. The first few weeks were underwhelming. A lot of hey messages, a few awkward conversations, and one truly disastrous coffee date, where the guy spent the entire time talking about his ex-girlfriend. I was starting to think Tinder wasn't for me. But then I matched with Liam. Liam's profile was intriguing. He had a great smile, kind eyes, and a bio that mentioned his love for vintage bookstores and obscure indie films. He seemed different from the other guys I'd encountered. Our conversations flowed easily. We talked about books, movies, music, and even our deepest fears and anxieties. He was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly insightful. I found myself looking forward to his messages, eager to learn more about him. After a week of constant texting, we decided to meet for drinks. He suggested a small, dimly lit bar in a quieter part of town. It wasn't my usual scene, but I was willing to try something new. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting at a table near the back. He looked even better in person. He had this effortless charm about him, a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. The date was perfect. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and genuinely seeming interested in what I had to say. There were no awkward silences, no forced conversations, just a natural and easy connection. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. We started seeing each other regularly. We went to museums, concerts, and even a few hiking trips. He introduced me to his friends, and I introduced him to mine. Everyone loved him. He was charming, witty, and always made an effort to be kind and considerate. I felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood me, someone who saw me for who I was. Things moved quickly. Within a few months, we were practically living together. He had a key to my apartment, and we spent most nights curled up on the couch, watching movies and talking until we fell asleep. I was happier than I had ever been. I started to imagine a future with him, a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. But then, subtle cracks started to appear. Small things at first, easily dismissed as quirks or misunderstandings. He became increasingly possessive, constantly asking where I was going, who I was with, and what I was doing. He didn't like me going out with my friends without him, and he would often call or text repeatedly when I did. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just worried about me. Maybe he was insecure, I reasoned, still hurt from a past relationship. I tried to reassure him, showering him with affection and attention. But it wasn't enough. His jealousy only seemed to intensify. He started going through my phone, checking my messages and call history. He accused me of flirting with other guys, even when I was just being friendly. He didn't like me talking about my past, especially my previous relationship. He seemed determined to erase any trace of my life before him. I started to feel suffocated. The constant questioning and accusations were exhausting. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid of saying or doing anything that might upset him. The joy and laughter that had once filled our relationship were slowly replaced by tension and anxiety. One night, I was at a work event when he called me, demanding to know why I hadn't answered his texts. I explained that I was busy, but he didn't believe me. He accused me of lying and demanded that I come home immediately. I refused, telling him that I had to stay for the event. He hung up on me, and I tried to ignore the knot of dread forming in my stomach. But then he started calling again, over and over, until my phone was buzzing incessantly. I finally answered, and he launched into a furious tirade, accusing me of cheating on him and threatening to come down to the event and make a scene. I was mortified. I hung up and turned off my phone, trying to salvage what was left of the evening. But the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped, that I had made a terrible mistake. When I got home that night, he was waiting for me, his eyes blazing with anger. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. He started yelling at me, accusing me of betraying him and ruining his life. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. I was scared. I had never seen him like this before. His face was contorted with rage, and his eyes were filled with a darkness I didn't recognize. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that I didn't know this man. I had fallen in love with a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that was now crumbling before my eyes. He pushed me against the wall, his hand tightening around my throat. I gasped for breath, my vision blurring. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, helpless, and utterly terrified. It was then, in that moment of sheer terror, that I realized the danger I was in. This wasn't just jealousy or insecurity. This was something much darker, something much more sinister. I was with someone who was capable of hurting me, someone who had the potential to destroy my life. Suddenly, a wave of adrenaline surged through me. I kicked him in the groin with all my might. He gasped and stumbled backward, momentarily releasing his grip on my throat. I seized the opportunity and ran, out the door and into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached a nearby gas station, where I collapsed, sobbing and gasping for air. The attendant called the police, and I told them everything. They took me to the hospital, where I was treated for minor injuries. The police arrested Liam a few hours later. He was charged with assault and battery, as well as other related offenses. I later found out that he had a history of domestic violence and had been arrested multiple times for similar incidents. He had hidden his past from me, carefully crafting a false image of himself to lure me into his trap. The aftermath was difficult. I was traumatized by what had happened, haunted by the memory of that night. I moved out of my apartment and found a new place to live. I started therapy to deal with the emotional scars. I cut off all contact with Liam and his friends. It took me a long time to heal, to trust again, to feel safe in my own skin. But eventually I did. I learned to recognize the warning signs, to trust my instincts, and to never ignore the red flags, no matter how charming or persuasive someone might seem. Looking back, I realized that there were signs all along, subtle hints of his possessiveness and controlling behavior. But I was so caught up in the whirlwind of romance that I ignored them, dismissing them as quirks or insecurities. Tinder, which had started as a source of fun and distraction, had almost become my undoing. It had led me to someone who was dangerous, someone who had the potential to destroy my life. I was lucky to escape with my life, but the experience changed me forever. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more cautious now. I take my time getting to know people, and I pay close attention to their words and actions. I trust my gut, and I'm not afraid to walk away if something feels off. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of self-awareness, boundaries, and trusting my intuition. It also taught me that appearances can be deceiving, and that even the most charming and charismatic individuals can harbor dark secrets. The danger I was in wasn't just a bad date or an awkward encounter. It was a real threat to my safety and well-being, and I didn't realize it until it was almost too late. Now, I'm committed to sharing my story, hoping to help others recognize the red flags and avoid the same mistakes I made. The world of online dating can be fun, but you need to protect yourself. I'm a survivor, and I'm determined to use my experience to empower others. I want to help people understand the importance of self-love, respect, and healthy relationships. I want to create a world where everyone feels safe and valued, where no one has to endure the kind of trauma I experienced. I honestly hate even thinking about Tinder now. It's not like I had any major success stories on there before, but what happened that night? That just tainted the whole thing for me. I haven't swiped right since. Maybe I'm being dramatic, but it really shook me. I was in a weird place back then, a couple of years out of college, working a dead-end job, feeling like everyone else was moving forward while I was stuck in neutral. So yeah, I was using Tinder. A lot. Mostly just for the distraction, a little ego boost, maybe the occasional forgettable date. I wasn't expecting to find the love of my life, but I wasn't trying to find whatever that was either. His name was Mark. Standard, I know. His profile was pretty generic. A couple of smiling photos, one with a dog, a brief bio about loving hiking and craft beer. He seemed normal, maybe a little boring, but normal. And that's what I was looking for at the time, normal. We matched, exchanged a few messages, and he seemed fine. Pleasant, polite, asked about my day. Nothing that set off any alarm bells. After a couple of days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for a drink. I hesitated. Something about him felt a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a flatness to his messages, a lack of genuine enthusiasm that made me uneasy. But I was bored, lonely, and frankly, kind of hoping for a distraction. So I said yes. We agreed to meet at a bar downtown on a Friday night. I told a couple of friends about the date, sent them a screenshot of his profile, the usual safety precautions. I figured if he turned out to be a creep, I could just make an excuse and leave. The bar was crowded and loud, the kind of place where you had to shout to be heard. I spotted Mark waiting near the entrance. He looked different in person. Not drastically so, but his pictures were definitely flattering. He was shorter than I expected. His hair was a little greasy, and he had this weird intensity in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. But I plastered on a smile and went over to greet him. The first hour was excruciating. The conversation was stilted and awkward. He mostly talked about himself, his job, his hobbies, none of which I found particularly interesting. He didn't ask me many questions, and when he did, he didn't seem to really listen to the answers. He kept staring at me, this intense, unwavering gaze that made me feel like I was being dissected. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but he always managed to bring it back to himself. And he had this habit of making these odd comments. Like, out of nowhere, he'd say something like, "You have very trusting eyes," or, "I bet you're a good secret keeper." It was creepy, but not overtly threatening. Just weird. I was starting to regret my decision to meet him. I was trying to figure out an escape plan when he suddenly suggested we go somewhere else. "This place is too loud," he said, leaning in close. "Let's go somewhere we can actually talk." I hesitated. I really didn't want to go anywhere alone with him, but I also didn't want to be rude. And part of me, I hate to admit, was still clinging to the hope that maybe he just wasn't good at first dates, that maybe he'd be more relaxed and engaging in a different environment. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. He suggested a nearby coffee shop that he said was open late. We walked there, and the silence between us was deafening. He kept glancing at me, that same unsettling intensity in his eyes, and I felt a growing sense of dread. The coffee shop was deserted. The lights were dim, and the only employee was a bored-looking teenager behind the counter. We ordered our drinks and sat down at a table in the back. Things went downhill fast after that. He started asking me really personal questions, probing into my past relationships, my family history, my deepest fears. I tried to deflect, to change the subject, but he wouldn't let up. He kept pushing, pressing, until I felt like I was being interrogated, and his comments became increasingly bizarre. He started talking about his theories about the government, about alien conspiracies, about the end of the world. He spoke in this low, hushed voice, like he was sharing some forbidden knowledge. I was terrified. I knew I had to get out of there. I stood up abruptly. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "I have an early morning." He looked up at me, His eyes narrowed. "But we were just getting to know each other," he said, his voice laced with a strange kind of menace. "I thought we were having a good time." "No," I said firmly. "I need to leave." I turned and started walking towards the door, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Where do you think you're going?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Let go of me," I said, pulling my arm away. "You're hurting me." He didn't let go. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. "Don't you want to know the truth?" he said, his breath hot on my face. "Don't you want to know what's really going on?" I was terrified. I screamed. Luckily, the teenager behind the counter heard me. He came running over, yelling at Mark to let me go. Mark finally released me, but he didn't run. He just stood there, staring at me, a strange smile on his face. I ran out of the coffee shop as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached a busy street. I flagged down a taxi and went straight home, locking all the doors and windows behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have avoided that situation. The next day, I reported Mark to Tinder, blocking him and deleting the app from my phone. I told my friends what happened, and they were horrified. They encouraged me to go to the police, but I hesitated. I didn't have any proof of what happened, and I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously. Plus, I just wanted to forget about it, to move on. But I couldn't forget. The memory of that night haunted me for months. I had nightmares about Mark, about his intense eyes, his creepy comments, his strong grip. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that he was watching me. I started avoiding going out alone, and I definitely stopped using dating apps. I felt violated, exposed, like I had let a monster into my life. It took a long time to feel safe again. I eventually started seeing a therapist, who helped me process what happened and develop coping mechanisms for my anxiety. I still have moments when the fear creeps back in, when I see someone who reminds me of Mark, when I hear a certain phrase or see a certain expression. But I'm learning to manage it, to not let it control my life. The events of that night will stay with me forever, a constant reminder of the dangers of online dating, of the importance of trusting my instincts, of the fragility of safety. I'll never know what Mark's intentions were that night, whether he was just a harmless weirdo or something much more sinister. But I know that I'll never take those kinds of risks again. I'm not saying all dating apps are evil or that everyone you meet online is a potential predator, but I am saying that it's important to be careful, to be aware of the risks, and to trust your gut, because sometimes the person behind the profile is not who they seem to be, and the consequences can be devastating. And sometimes you swipe right on a nightmare. I met Liam on Tinder during that weird in-between phase after a bad breakup, and before I decided to become a hermit. I was swiping with a vengeance, not really looking for anything serious, just trying to prove to myself that I was still desirable, I guess. Liam was different from the usual parade of gym selfies and shirtless bathroom mirror shots. His profile was all pictures of him hiking, volunteering at an animal shelter, and reading in coffee shops. He seemed genuinely kind, intelligent, and, honestly, a little bit dorky, which I found strangely endearing. We matched, and the conversation flowed easily. He wasn't pushy, didn't bombard me with cheesy pickup lines, and actually seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about our favorite books, our travel dreams, and our families. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee. The date was perfect. He was even more charming in person, and we spent hours talking and laughing. There was an instant connection, a spark that I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. We ended up going for a walk in the park afterward, holding hands, and sharing our first kiss under a tree. It was like something out of a movie. Over the next few weeks, Liam and I became inseparable. We went on hikes, cooked dinners together, and spent hours just cuddling on the couch watching movies. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Kind, funny, intelligent, and genuinely caring. I started to let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone special. Then things started to get weird. It started subtly. Liam became increasingly secretive about his phone. He'd always turn it face down when we were together, and he'd get noticeably agitated if I even glanced at it. He'd also started disappearing for hours at a time without explanation, claiming he was running errands or dealing with a family issue. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing day. My friends noticed it too. They said he was acting distant, evasive, and that something just didn't feel right. One night, I was at Liam's apartment while he supposedly went to pick up groceries. He had left his laptop open on the coffee table, and I was trying to decide what movie to watch. A notification popped up on the screen, an email from a dating website. My heart sank. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I clicked on the email. It was a confirmation for a new profile he had created, complete with pictures and a bio. My stomach churned as I scrolled through it, reading his carefully crafted lies. He claimed he was single, looking for something casual, and that he loved hiking and reading. Sound familiar? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The man I thought I knew, the man I had fallen for, was a complete fabrication. He was a liar, a cheat, and a master manipulator. I slammed the laptop shut and burst into tears. When Liam returned, I confronted him. I showed him the email, and he went pale. He stammered, tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. He finally confessed, admitting that he had been seeing other women behind my back. He said he wasn't ready for a serious relationship, and that he didn't want to hurt me. I was furious. I screamed, I cried, I threw things. I couldn't believe I had been so blind, so naive. I had fallen for his carefully constructed facade, ignoring all the warning signs. I kicked him out of his apartment and stormed out, vowing never to speak to him again. I went home and spent the next few days wallowing in self-pity, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. But as the initial shock wore off, I started to see things more clearly. I realized that I hadn't done anything wrong. Liam was the one who was flawed, the one who was incapable of honesty and commitment. He was a serial dater, a player, who thrived on manipulating and deceiving women. I also realized that I had been so eager to find someone, so desperate to fill the void in my life, that I had ignored my instincts and allowed myself to be blinded by his charm. I had wanted to believe in the fairy tale so badly that I had overlooked the red flags. It was a painful lesson, but a valuable one. I spent the next few months focusing on myself. I started going to therapy, working out, and spending time with my friends and family. I rediscovered my passions and interests, and I started to feel like myself again. I learned that I didn't need a relationship to be happy. I was whole and complete on my own. I also learned to trust my instincts and to never ignore red flags, no matter how charming the person might be. Eventually, I decided to give dating another try, but this time, I approached it with a different mindset. I was more cautious, more discerning, and more aware of the potential pitfalls. I didn't rush into anything, and I made sure to listen to my gut. I met a few nice guys, but none of them felt quite right, and that was okay. I was no longer desperate to find the one. I was content with my life, and I knew that the right person would come along when the time was right. One day, I was at a coffee shop, reading a book, when a guy approached me and struck up a conversation. His name was Ben, and he was different. He wasn't trying to impress me, wasn't using cheesy pickup lines, and actually seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for hours, and I felt a connection, a spark that I hadn't felt in a long time. But this time, I didn't rush into anything. I took things slow, and I made sure to pay attention to the red flags. Ben turned out to be a kind, honest, and genuine person. He was everything that Liam wasn't. He respected me, valued my opinions, and supported my dreams. He was the real deal. We've been together for 2 years now, and I couldn't be happier. I've learned that true love is about honesty, trust, and mutual respect. It's not about fairy tales or perfect profiles. It's about finding someone who loves you for who you are, flaws and all. I still think about Liam sometimes, and I'm grateful for the experience, even though it was painful. It taught me valuable lessons about myself, about relationships, and about the importance of trusting my instincts. I learned a valuable lesson that day about the dangers of online dating, but more importantly, I learned about the importance of self-love, self-respect, and the power of trusting your gut. I realized that I am worthy of love, and that I deserve to be treated with honesty and respect, and I won't settle for anything less. I won't settle to be deceived, I won't settle to be a toy, and I won't settle to be ignored. That is a lesson that will stick with me for the rest of my days. I am happy for all the mistakes that I have done, and I am grateful because I grew up from it. Okay, so, I don't even know where to start. Thinking about this whole thing still makes my stomach clench up, even months later. I guess. I guess it started like any other stupid Tinder story. I was bored, lonely, and had just gotten out of a pretty rough breakup. My friends kept telling me to get back out there. So I caved and re-downloaded the app. Swiping felt mindless, like a game. You see a picture, read a bio, or don't. Swipe left or right, and move on. It's so detached, so disposable. But hey, that was the point, right? Distraction. Anyway, I matched with this guy named David. His profile was pretty generic, some hiking pics, a blurry shot with his dog, and a bio that said he was just looking for someone to grab a beer with and see where things go. Harmless, right? He wasn't drop-dead gorgeous, but he had kind eyes and a decent smile. We started chatting, and he seemed normal enough. He asked about my job, my hobbies, the usual stuff. He was a little intense with the compliments, calling me beautiful and amazing within the first few messages, but I chalked it up to him being eager to make a good impression. We talked for a few days, and he suggested we meet up. I hesitated. I hadn't met anyone from Tinder in ages, and the whole thing felt a little daunting. But he was persistent, and honestly, I was craving some kind of human connection. So I agreed. We decided to meet at a small, local brewery, somewhere I felt relatively safe and comfortable. I told a couple of my friends where I was going and what time I expected to be back, just in case. You know, the usual precautions. When I got to the brewery, David was already there, sitting at a table near the back. He looked pretty much like his pictures, maybe a little less put together. He was wearing a slightly stained t-shirt and jeans, and his hair was a bit messy, but he was smiling, and he seemed genuinely happy to see me. The first hour or so was fine. We talked about our jobs, our families, our interests. He was a good listener, asked a lot of questions, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. But there were little things, subtle things, that started to make me feel uneasy. He kept touching my arm or my hand while he was talking, which I didn't really like. And he had this way of staring at me, like he was trying to see right through me. He also kept steering the conversation back to me, even when I tried to ask him about himself. It was like he was trying to gather as much information as possible. I started feeling a little claustrophobic, like he was invading my personal space. I tried to subtly create some distance, but he didn't seem to notice. Then he started talking about my breakup. I hadn't brought it up, but he somehow knew about it. He said he had seen something on my social media. He started saying things like, "He didn't deserve you," and "You're too good for him." It was nice to hear, in a way, but it also felt manipulative, like he was trying to play on my vulnerabilities. I tried to change the subject, but he kept bringing it back to my ex. He started asking me really personal questions about the relationship, things that I didn't feel comfortable sharing with a stranger. I told him I didn't want to talk about it, but he kept pushing. That's when I started to get really creeped out. I made an excuse to go to the bathroom, and while I was in there, I texted one of my friends to call me with a fake emergency. When I came back to the table, I told David that I had to leave. I said that my friend needed me, and that I was really sorry. He didn't take it well. He started getting angry, saying that I was being rude, that he had driven all the way to meet me, and that I was wasting his time. I tried to stay calm, but I was starting to panic. I just wanted to get out of there. I told him again that I had to go, and I started walking towards the door. He followed me, still arguing. As I reached the door, he grabbed my arm. Not hard, but enough to stop me. He said, "Why are you doing this? I thought we were having a good time." I pulled my arm away and said, "I have to go." And I ran out of the brewery. I didn't stop running until I got to my car. I locked the doors and sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath. I was shaking. I drove home as fast as I could, and when I got there, I locked all the doors and windows. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the evening in my head, wondering if I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a little awkward and pushy, but something felt really wrong. The next day, I blocked David on Tinder and all my other social media accounts. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I started getting strange phone calls. No caller ID, and when I answered, there was just silence. I ignored them, thinking it was just a prank call or a wrong number. But they kept coming, several times a day. Then, I started noticing things. Little things, like my mail being rearranged or my garbage cans being moved. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, I was walking home from work when I saw someone following me. It was dark, and I couldn't see their face, but they were definitely there. I started walking faster, and they did too. I was terrified. I ran the rest of the way home, and when I got inside, I locked the door and called the police. They came and took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They suggested I get a security system. I couldn't afford one. The next few weeks were a living hell. The phone calls continued, the feeling of being watched intensified, and I started having nightmares. I was constantly on edge, afraid to leave my apartment. I felt trapped. Then, one night, I came home and found my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart stopped. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and silent. I flipped on the light, and that's when I saw it. Scrawled on my living room wall in red paint were the words, "I'm always watching." I screamed. I ran out of the apartment and called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. They dusted for fingerprints and took pictures of the message. They told me to stay with a friend or family member for a few days while they investigated. I went to stay with my parents. I was a mess. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And I was constantly crying. I felt like my life was over. The police eventually identified David as the prime suspect. They tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. He denied everything, but they had enough evidence to charge him with stalking and harassment. He was arrested and held in jail pending trial. I was relieved, but I was also terrified. I knew that even if he was convicted, he would eventually get out of prison. And what would he do then? I decided to move. I couldn't stay in that apartment, knowing what had happened there. I found a new place in a different city, far away from David. I changed my phone number and deleted all my social media accounts. I went into therapy to deal with the trauma. It's been months since then, and I'm slowly starting to heal. But I'll never be the same. I'm still afraid to go out alone at night. I'm still paranoid about strangers. And I'll never, ever use Tinder again. It's not just the app itself. It's the whole idea of meeting someone online, someone you know nothing about. It's too easy for people to hide who they really are, to create a fake persona and lure you into a false sense of security. I was so naive. I thought I could handle it, that I was smart enough to spot the red flags. But I was wrong. I let my guard down, and I almost paid the price. This whole experience has taught me a valuable lesson. You can't trust anyone, especially not someone you meet on Tinder. Because this is a story I still can't believe is actually mine. It's a Tinder tale gone terribly wrong. A cautionary story about trusting profile pics and witty banter over common sense. I swear, I'm still trying to piece together how I let things get as far as they did. I was freshly single, reeling from a pretty brutal breakup, and my friends were all pushing me to get back out there. Of course, getting back out there in the 21st century meant downloading Tinder. I'd always been skeptical. Dating apps felt so artificial. But honestly, I was lonely and wanted a distraction. So, I created a profile, carefully selecting pictures that made me look reasonably attractive without screaming desperate. Wrote a bio that was equal parts funny and self-deprecating, and started swiping. For the most part, it was the usual Tinder experience. Endless streams of generic profiles, awkward conversations, and the occasional super like from someone who was clearly not my type. Then I matched with him. Liam. His profile was intriguing. Moody black and white photos, artistic shots of urban landscapes, and a bio that quoted some obscure poet I'd actually read in college. He seemed intelligent, creative, and definitely not like the typical swipe right, wanna hang kind of guy. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything: books, movies, music, our hopes, our fears. He even managed to make me laugh about the breakup, which I didn't think was possible at that point. After a week of almost constant messaging, he suggested we meet up. I was hesitant. I'd had my fair share of Tinder duds, and I was nervous about being disappointed again. But Liam was persistent, and I had to admit, I was really drawn to him. Plus, my friends kept chanting, "Just do it," with the enthusiasm of a Nike commercial. So I agreed. He suggested a small, independent bookstore cafe in a part of the city I wasn't super familiar with. It sounded charming and low-key, perfect for a first date. I told a couple of friends where I was going and what time I expected to be back. You know, the usual safety precautions. The day of the date, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, rereading our conversations, and mentally preparing myself for any possible scenario. When I finally arrived at the cafe, I was a sweaty, jittery mess. He was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, and he looked nothing like his pictures. I mean, he was still attractive, in a brooding, intense kind of way, but his photos had clearly been strategically angled and filtered to hide certain imperfections. He was older than I had initially thought. His face was more weathered, and he had this unsettling intensity in his eyes that I hadn't picked up on in the photos. But I'd already committed. I took a deep breath, plastered on a smile, and went over to introduce myself. The first hour was awkward. He was quiet, almost withdrawn, and didn't seem nearly as engaging as he had been online. He mostly asked questions about me, listening intently but offering little in return. It felt like an interrogation rather than a conversation. As the date progressed, he started to open up a bit, but his stories were strange. He talked about his fascination with true crime, his obsession with unsolved mysteries, and his belief that the world was full of hidden conspiracies. He spoke with such fervor that it was hard to tell if he was joking or completely serious. Then, he started asking about my apartment, not in a casual, "So, where do you live?" kind of way. He wanted specifics. What floor I was on, how many windows I had, what kind of security system I had, which, by the way, was none. He asked if I lived alone, if I had any roommates, if I had any pets. I started to feel really uncomfortable. My gut was screaming at me to end the date and get out of there, but I didn't want to be rude. Plus, a small part of me still held onto the hope that this was just a weird first impression, and he'd eventually relax and be the charming guy I'd been talking to online. Big mistake. After the cafe, he suggested we go for a walk. Again, I hesitated. It was getting dark, and I was definitely not feeling the date. But he was so insistent, and I was so determined to be polite, that I reluctantly agreed. We walked through the dimly lit streets, and he continued his rambling monologues about crime and conspiracy. He started talking about how easy it was to disappear in the city, how many people went missing every year without a trace, and how the police were too incompetent to solve most cases. The conversation took a darker and more personal turn. He started asking about my past, about the breakup I'd mentioned in our chats. He pried into the details, wanting to know everything. What went wrong? Who was at fault? How I was coping? I felt increasingly vulnerable and exposed. I tried to deflect, to change the subject, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept pressing, digging deeper, until I felt like I was reliving the entire breakup right there on the street. Then, he stopped walking and turned to face me. The street was deserted, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp. His eyes were intense, almost manic. He said, "You know, it's funny how people think they can just walk away from things, that they can just erase the past and start over. But the past always catches up, doesn't it?" His words were so loaded, so threatening, that I felt a surge of pure terror. I knew, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just a bad date. This was something far more dangerous. I stammered, "I think I should go." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes unblinking. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, not knowing where I was going, just wanted to get away from him. I could hear his footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I ran until I reached a busy street, filled with people and bright lights. I ducked into a crowded bar, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked back, but he wasn't there. I stayed in that bar for hours, too terrified to leave. I called my friends, told them everything that had happened, and begged them to come pick me up. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and anxiety. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and slept with a knife under my pillow. I deleted my Tinder profile and scrubbed my social media clean. I felt like I was being watched, followed, haunted by the memory of his intense gaze. I never saw Liam again, but the experience left a lasting scar. I'm still wary of online dating, still haunted by the realization that someone you meet through a seemingly harmless app can turn out to be your worst nightmare. I learned a hard lesson about trusting my instincts, about not being afraid to be rude, and about the importance of prioritizing my safety above all else. And I definitely learned to take Tinder profiles with a massive grain of salt, because behind that carefully curated image and witty bio, there might be someone far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. It makes me wonder who I would ever talk to again in my life. It was something that I could never overcome. I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. I always rolled my eyes at those Tinder nightmare articles, thinking, yeah, right, drama queens. But trust me, reality is way worse than anything you can read online. This isn't just a bad date or a weird hookup gone wrong. This is about something that shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about people. It all started, like it usually does, with a swipe. I was bored, lonely after a breakup, and figured why not? I wasn't looking for love, just some casual fun, maybe a distraction. I matched with this guy, Liam. He seemed normal. Regular guy pics, hiking, playing guitar, hanging out with friends. His bio was generic, looking for good vibes and good company. Nothing that screamed serial killer or even douchebag. We chatted for a few days, mostly light stuff. What kind of music we liked, our favorite movies, what we did for a living. He was a software developer. I was a graphic designer. Seemed harmless. He was quick to respond, engaging, and didn't come on too strong. He suggested meeting up for coffee, and I agreed. I even told my best friend Sarah about him and sent her a screenshot of his profile, just in case. If I go missing, look for this guy. I joked. The coffee date was fine. Actually, it was better than fine. He was even more attractive in person, with a goofy smile and kind eyes. We talked for hours. Not just surface-level stuff, but real conversations about our passions, our fears, our dreams. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. We laughed, we connected, and by the end of the date, I was definitely feeling butterflies. We went out a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Dinner, movies, even a hike in the mountains. He was always a perfect gentleman, respectful, and considerate. We hadn't slept together yet, which was actually kind of refreshing. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone special. Then, things started to get weird. It started subtly. He'd ask me questions about my routine, my schedule, who I spent my time with. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Just normal getting to know you stuff, right? But then the questions became more specific, more intrusive. He wanted to know exactly when I left for work, what route I took, when I usually came home. He asked about my neighbors, if I had a security system, if I lived alone. I started to feel a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just being thorough, trying to make sure I was safe. But then he started showing up unannounced. Once, he just happened to be at the same coffee shop I go to every morning. Another time, he showed up at my work, claiming he was in the area and wanted to surprise me. It was flattering at first, but then it started to feel suffocating. I tried to talk to him about it, to set some boundaries, but he'd always brush it off, saying he just cared about me and wanted to spend as much time with me as possible. He'd make me feel guilty for even questioning his intentions. "Don't you trust me?" he'd ask, his eyes filled with hurt, and I wanted to trust him. I really did, but something just felt off. One night, I was at home, working on a project, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a little startled. I peeked through the peephole, and it was Liam, again unannounced. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Hey," he said, smiling. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd see if you were free." "Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We talked about this. You can't just show up like this. I need my space." His smile faded, and his eyes turned cold. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "Don't you want to see me?" "Of course I do," I said. "But I need you to respect my boundaries. I need you to call first." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You're being unreasonable," he said. "I just want to be with you." I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. His grip tightened, and I could feel his fingernails digging into my skin. "Liam, you're hurting me," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, just stared at me with those cold, empty eyes. I started to panic. I knew I had to get away from him. I kicked him in the shin as hard as I could. He yelped in pain and released my arm. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran to the window and peeked through the curtains. He was still standing there, staring at my door, his face contorted with anger. I watched as he slowly turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep that night. I was too terrified to close my eyes. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering what I had done wrong, what I could have done differently. I knew I had to end things with him, but I was afraid of what he might do. The next day, I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, and told Sarah everything that had happened. She was horrified and urged me to go to the police. I hesitated. I didn't have any proof, just my word against his. I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously. But then, a few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. "I know where you live." It read, "I'm watching you." I froze. I knew it was him. I knew he was stalking me. I went to the police. This time, they took me seriously. They took a report, but told me there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They advised me to stay with a friend or family member and to call them if I saw him again. I stayed with Sarah for a few weeks, terrified to go back to my apartment. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was lurking in the shadows. Eventually, the police were able to get a restraining order against him. It wasn't much, but it gave me some peace of mind. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number again, and tried to rebuild my life. But the fear never really went away. I still have nightmares about him. I still jump at every unexpected sound. I'm still afraid to trust anyone. This is my warning. This is what can happen when you swipe right on the wrong person. Tinder can be fun, it can be exciting, but it can also be dangerous. Be careful who you trust. Don't give out too much information. And if something feels off, trust your instincts. It's better to be safe than sorry. I'm sharing my story because I don't want this to happen to anyone else. I want people to be aware of the risks, to be vigilant, and to protect themselves. This isn't just a bad date story. This is a story about stalking, harassment, and fear. This is a story about the dark side of online dating. Please be careful out there. Your life may depend on it. He was out there, and it could happen to you too. I still can't believe this actually happened. It's one of those stories that sound so outlandish, so perfectly crafted for a Reddit thread, that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But then I remember the details, the specific weight of the dread I felt, and I know it was real. It all started, innocently enough, on Tinder. I was going through a rough patch. A breakup, a job loss, the whole shebang. My friends insisted I get back out there, that a little swiping might boost my spirits. I wasn't convinced, but I caved, downloaded the app, and created a profile with a few vaguely flattering photos and a bio that read something like, "Just looking for good conversation and maybe a distraction." Low expectations were the name of the game. I swiped through a sea of gym selfies, fish pictures, and guys who apparently thought shirtless bathroom mirror shots were the peak of seduction. It was exhausting. Just as I was about to delete the app in frustration, I saw him, Liam. His profile was different. No posed photos, no cheesy pickup lines. Just a few candid shots of him hiking, playing guitar, and laughing with friends. His bio was simple. Writer. Loves books, coffee, and exploring new places. He seemed normal. Refreshingly so. We matched, and I braced myself for the usual awkward small talk. But Liam was different. He asked thoughtful questions, engaged in genuine conversation, and actually seemed interested in getting to know me. We bonded over our shared love of literature, our mutual disdain for reality TV, and our dreams of traveling the world. He was witty, intelligent, and surprisingly charming. I found myself looking forward to his messages, and before I knew it, I was actually excited. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet for coffee. I was nervous, of course, but also cautiously optimistic. He seemed too good to be true, but I tried to push that thought aside. Maybe, just maybe, Tinder had finally delivered. The coffee date went better than I could have imagined. Liam was even more attractive in person, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. We talked for hours, effortlessly transitioning from one topic to another. There were no awkward silences, no forced conversations. It felt natural, easy. By the end of the date, I was completely smitten. We saw each other again a few days later, this time for dinner, and then again the following weekend for a hike in the mountains. With each date, I fell harder. He was everything I thought I wanted: smart, funny, adventurous, and genuinely kind. He seemed to understand me in a way that no one ever had before. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had found something real. Then came the trip. Liam had mentioned that he was planning a weekend getaway to a secluded cabin in the woods, a place he used to visit as a child. He invited me to come along. I hesitated at first. It felt like a big step, especially so early in the relationship. But he was so persuasive, and the idea of spending a romantic weekend alone with him was incredibly tempting. After much deliberation, I said yes. Looking back, I should have listened to my gut. There were red flags, subtle hints that something wasn't quite right. But I was so blinded by infatuation that I ignored them, rationalized them away. The drive to the cabin was long and winding, taking us deeper and deeper into the woods. Cell service became spotty, and the landscape grew increasingly desolate. By the time we reached the cabin, it was dark. The cabin itself was old and rustic, with a musty smell and a general air of disrepair. It wasn't exactly the romantic retreat I had envisioned, but I tried to remain optimistic. That first night was unsettling. The cabin was creaky and drafty, and the silence was deafening. Liam seemed different, too. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He kept staring out the window into the darkness, as if he were expecting someone. I tried to brush it off as nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. We went for a hike in the woods, and Liam started acting strangely. He kept veering off the trail, muttering about old memories and hidden places. He seemed increasingly agitated, and his eyes had a wild, unnerving glint. At one point, he led me to a clearing deep in the woods. In the center of the clearing was a large, gnarled tree with strange carvings etched into its trunk. Liam became fixated on the tree, tracing the carvings with his fingers and reciting what sounded like an ancient incantation. I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I tried to convince Liam to go back to the cabin, but he refused. He insisted that I needed to see something, that he had a surprise for me. He led me deeper into the woods, until we reached a small, overgrown graveyard. The tombstones were old and weathered, and the names were illegible. Liam stopped in front of one particular tombstone and knelt down. He brushed away the dirt and moss, revealing a name, Sarah. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of sadness and desperation. "Sarah was my sister," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She died here a long time ago." He proceeded to tell me a story about how his sister had gone missing in the woods when they were children and how her body had been found a few weeks later, buried in this very graveyard. He claimed that she had been murdered and that he had spent his entire life trying to find her killer. I was horrified. I couldn't imagine the pain he must have gone through. But something about his story didn't add up. His version of Sarah's death changed drastically every time he explained it. As the day wore on, Liam's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. He talked to himself, arguing with unseen voices. It became clear that he was mentally unstable. I tried to reason with him, to convince him to get help, but he refused to listen. He became convinced that I was part of some conspiracy, that I was trying to stop him from finding his sister's killer. That night, I knew I had to escape. Liam had become completely unhinged, and I feared for my safety. I waited until he fell asleep, then quietly slipped out of the cabin. I ran through the woods, stumbling and falling, desperate to get away. I eventually made it to a main road, where I flagged down a passing car. The driver, a kind elderly woman, took me to the nearest town, where I contacted the police. The police launched a search for Liam, but they couldn't find him. They searched the cabin, the woods, the graveyard, everything, but he had vanished without a trace. They did, however, discover some disturbing evidence. They found several journals filled with Liam's rambling thoughts and disturbing fantasies. They also found a collection of photographs of young women, all of whom bore a striking resemblance to me. It turned out that Liam had a history of mental illness and a long record of stalking and harassing women. He had used Tinder to lure unsuspecting victims into his web of lies and manipulation. I was lucky to escape with my life. Others may not have been so fortunate. The experience left me deeply traumatized. I had trusted someone completely, only to discover that he was a dangerous psychopath. I spent months in therapy, trying to process what had happened. To this day, I'm still haunted by the memory of Liam and the weekend in the woods. It's a reminder that you can never truly know someone, especially someone you meet online. I still can't believe it actually happened. It feels like a nightmare, a twisted fairy tale. But it was real, and it changed my life forever. I may never fully recover. I got off Tinder for good, and will never put myself in a situation to trust someone I meet online. I learned my lesson. I'm still haunted to this day. I'm not usually one to share personal stuff online. I like my privacy, you know? But this is something I feel like I need to get off my chest. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid a similar situation. So here it goes. It all started, predictably enough, on Tinder. I was fresh out of a long-term relationship, feeling lonely, and figured swiping might be a harmless distraction. I set my preferences, guys around my age, late 20s. Ideally someone who liked hiking or books or something vaguely intellectual. I wasn't expecting much, just maybe a few decent conversations. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was pretty standard. A couple of pictures of him smiling, one of him snowboarding, a short bio mentioning his love for craft beer and travel. He seemed normal enough, maybe even a bit bland, but I was tired of the overly curated profiles and the guys who looked like they spent more time at the gym than reading books. So I swiped right. We started chatting, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my job, my hobbies, my family. We talked about our favorite books, our travel dreams, our biggest fears. It was easy. Too easy, maybe? I should have seen that as a warning sign. After a week or so of chatting, he suggested we meet up for coffee. I hesitated. I usually waited longer before meeting someone from Tinder, but Liam seemed so normal. Plus, I was getting tired of the endless texting and wanted to see if the connection was real. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was exactly as he looked in his pictures. Average height, brown hair, a friendly smile. He was a bit more reserved in person than he had been online, but I chalked it up to nerves. The coffee date went well. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, and he made me feel comfortable and at ease. By the end of the date, I was actually starting to feel optimistic about this whole Tinder thing. We went on a few more dates after that. We went to a museum, saw a movie, and even went for a hike. Each time, I felt like I was getting to know him better, and each time, I liked him more. He was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny. He seemed like the perfect guy. Then things started to get weird. It started small, subtle things that I initially dismissed as coincidences or me being overly sensitive. He started showing up at places I frequented without me mentioning I'd be there. Once, I was at my favorite bookstore, browsing the new releases, and he just happened to be there too. He said he was in the neighborhood and decided to pop in, but it felt off. Then he started mentioning things I had only told him in private messages, things I hadn't shared with anyone else. He'd bring them up casually, as if they were common knowledge, but it made me uneasy. How did he know these things? I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't go away. One night, after we had been dating for about a month, he invited me back to his place for dinner. I was hesitant, but I also didn't want to seem like I was being difficult. Plus, I was starting to feel like I was falling for him, and I wanted to take things to the next level. His apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and tidy. He had cooked a delicious meal, and we ate and talked and laughed like we always did. But something felt different that night. The air felt heavy, the atmosphere tense. After dinner, he suggested we watch a movie. We curled up on the couch, and he put his arm around me. I leaned into him, feeling safe and comfortable. But then he started kissing me, and something inside me just recoiled. His kisses were too intense, too eager. He started touching me in ways that made me uncomfortable, and I found myself pulling away. He didn't stop. I told him to stop, but he ignored me. He kept kissing me, kept touching me, and I started to panic. I pushed him away, harder this time, and told him I wasn't ready. He finally stopped, but his eyes were different. They were cold and hard, and there was a strange glint in them that I had never seen before. He looked like a completely different person. He started yelling at me, accusing me of leading him on, of playing games. He said I had no right to reject him after he had been so nice to me. His words were like knives, cutting deep into my soul. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but I was afraid of what he might do if I tried. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't mean to hurt him, that I just needed more time. He seemed to calm down a bit, but his eyes were still cold and distant. He offered me a drink, said it would help me relax. I hesitated, but I didn't want to make him angry again, so I accepted. I took a sip of the drink, and it tasted strange, bitter and metallic. I started to feel dizzy and lightheaded. My vision blurred, and my body felt heavy and numb. I realized he had drugged me. I tried to stand up, to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I stumbled and fell to the floor. Liam stood over me, his face a mask of cold fury. He started talking, but his words were distorted and muffled. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I could sense the hatred and anger in his voice. He picked me up and carried me to the bedroom. I was too weak to fight him. I was completely at his mercy. I don't want to go into detail about what happened next. It was the most terrifying and traumatic experience of my life. He violated me in ways I can't even describe. He took away my dignity, my sense of self, my trust in others. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like an eternity. Eventually, I passed out. When I woke up, I was alone in his apartment. My body was sore and bruised, and my mind was a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I managed to get dressed and stumbled out of the apartment. I went straight to the police and reported what had happened. They took me to the hospital for a medical examination and collected evidence. They started an investigation, but I didn't have much hope that they would catch him. He was careful, meticulous. He had probably done this before. The police took my phone and did a deep dive. After a couple of weeks, they found something extremely shocking. They showed me a profile they had found that was linked to Liam. This profile was on the dark web. He had a website where he showed videos of previous women. The police told me he was a serial rapist. After everything, they caught him. The aftermath of the assault was devastating. I was traumatized, depressed, and filled with self-blame. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I felt like my life was over. I started seeing a therapist, and she helped me process what had happened and start to heal. It was a long and difficult journey, but I eventually started to feel like myself again. I still have nightmares, still struggle with trust issues, still feel a pang of fear every time I see a man who resembles Liam. But I'm stronger now. I'm a survivor. I'm sharing my story because I want to warn other women about the dangers of online dating. Not everyone on Tinder is who they seem to be. There are predators out there, people who are looking to exploit and harm others. Be careful. Be cautious. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to say no, to walk away, to protect yourself. And if something terrible does happen, don't be afraid to seek help. You are not alone. There are people who care about you and want to support you. I'm not saying that all online dating is bad. I know people who have found love and happiness through Tinder and other dating apps. But it's important to be aware of the risks and to take steps to protect yourself. My experience was a nightmare, but I'm not going to let it define me. I'm going to keep living my life, keep pursuing my dreams, and keep fighting for a world where women are safe and respected. I hope my story can help someone else avoid the same fate. Be safe out there, everyone. And remember, you are not alone. If you need help, please reach out. There are people who care. I wish I could say I was some naive ingenue, stumbling innocently into the dark corners of Tinder. But that wouldn't be true. By the time it happened, I was a seasoned swiper, a veteran of countless awkward coffee dates and ghosting expeditions. I knew the rules, the unspoken expectations, the general vibe. Tinder was, for me, a curated selection of potential, distractions. A way to pass the time, boost the ego, maybe find someone interesting enough to grab a drink with on a Friday night. I wasn't looking for love, or even anything remotely resembling it. Just a connection, a fleeting spark, anything to break the monotony. That's probably why I swiped right on Elias. His profile was different, not in a red flag waving wildly kind of way, but subtly, almost imperceptibly off. He only had 2 pictures. One a blurry shot of him standing in front of a graffiti-covered wall, his face obscured by the shadow of a baseball cap. the other a close-up of his hands, holding a half-smoked cigarette, the nicotine-stained fingers surprisingly elegant. His bio was even more cryptic, looking for someone to explore the liminal with. I had to Google liminal. The definition, relating to a transitional or initial stage of a process, intrigued me. It was pretentious, sure, but also compelling. Our first conversation was equally odd. He didn't ask the usual getting-to-know-you questions. Instead, he wanted to know about my recurring dreams, my deepest fears, the things that kept me up at night. He spoke in metaphors and riddles, dropping allusions to esoteric concepts I barely understood. It was exhausting, but also stimulating. Like trying to solve a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. We messaged back and forth for hours, a digital dance of cryptic pronouncements and veiled inquiries. He never revealed much about himself, but he drew me out, coaxing me to share secrets I usually kept locked away. We met at a dive bar downtown, a place so dimly lit and sticky-floored it felt like stepping into another dimension. Elias looked exactly as I expected, tall and lean, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. He was wearing a worn leather jacket and a silver ring on his left thumb. He had an intensity about him that was both alluring and unsettling. The conversation was intense. He talked about parallel universes, astral projection, the collective unconscious. It was all a bit much, bordering on outright bonkers, but he delivered it with such conviction, such unwavering belief, that I found myself listening, captivated. He never made a move, never even touched my arm, but he held my gaze, his eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving focus. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like he was peeling back the layers of my carefully constructed facade. We met again a few days later, this time at a late-night art gallery opening. The space was filled with bizarre installations and avant-garde performances. Elias seemed completely at home, navigating the crowded room with an effortless grace. He introduced me to a group of his friends, artists, musicians, poets, all equally eccentric and enigmatic. They spoke in a language I didn't quite understand, referencing obscure figures and philosophical theories. I felt like an outsider, a tourist in a world I wasn't meant to inhabit. But Elias kept me close, guiding me through the labyrinth of conversations and art pieces. He made me feel seen, like I was finally being recognized for something other than the carefully curated image I presented to the world. Over the next few weeks, Elias became my guide to the liminal. He took me to abandoned buildings, hidden parks, underground concerts. We explored the hidden corners of the city, the places where the veil between reality and something else felt thin. He showed me a different way of seeing the world, a way of perceiving the hidden patterns and unspoken connections that linked everything together. I started to question everything I thought I knew, to doubt the reality I had always taken for granted. I was falling for him hard, not in a conventional, romantic way, but in a more profound, unsettling way. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a catalyst, a portal to another dimension of experience. I thought I was happy. I thought I was finally living. Then the dream started. Vivid, disturbing visions that bled into my waking life. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The dreams were always different, but they shared a common thread, a sense of impending doom, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I tried to talk to Elias about it, but he just smiled and said, "The liminal is calling to you." He seemed to find my fear amusing, like it was a sign that I was evolving, transcending my limitations. One night, Elias took me to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the moon and the distant city glow. Inside, he had set up a makeshift altar, adorned with candles, crystals, and strange symbols I didn't recognize. He told me he wanted to show me something, to take me to the next level. He said he needed my trust, my complete surrender. I hesitated. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. But I wanted to believe him, to follow him into the unknown. I wanted to prove that I was brave enough, that I was worthy of his attention. He started chanting in a language I didn't understand, his voice growing louder and more intense. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen energy. The shadows danced around us, taking on grotesque shapes. I felt a tingling sensation spreading through my body, a strange mixture of pleasure and fear. He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. His eyes burned into mine, and I felt like I was falling into an abyss. He told me to close my eyes and let go, to surrender to the experience. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and I don't know what happened next. My memory is fragmented, distorted, like a broken mirror. I remember flashes of light, whispers in the dark, a feeling of being pulled in multiple directions at once. I remember a pain so intense it felt like my soul was being ripped apart. And I remember a presence, something vast and ancient and utterly terrifying, that seemed to be watching me from the other side. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been minutes, hours, days. Time seemed to lose all meaning. When I finally came to, I was lying on the floor of the warehouse alone. Elias was gone. The candles had burned down. The altar was a mess. The air was still thick with the residual energy of whatever had happened. I was disoriented, nauseous, and terrified. I stumbled out of the warehouse and back to my car, my body trembling uncontrollably. I drove home in a daze, barely able to see the road. I haven't seen or heard from Elias since that night. I tried to find him, to understand what happened, but it was like he had vanished from the face of the earth. His phone was disconnected. His social media accounts were deleted. His friends claimed they didn't know where he was, or even who he was. It was like he had never existed. I've tried to piece together the events of that night, to make sense of the fragments of memory that haunt me. Was it a drug-induced hallucination? A psychotic break? Or something else? Something more sinister? I don't know. All I know is that something changed in me that night. Something broke. I'm not the same person I was before. I see the world differently now, with a newfound sense of paranoia and dread. I'm afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone, afraid of my own thoughts. I still use Tinder, occasionally. I know it's probably not the healthiest thing for me, but it's a way to feel connected, a way to reassure myself that I'm not completely alone in the world. But I'm much more cautious now. I vet my matches more carefully. I avoid anyone who seems even remotely eccentric or enigmatic. I stick to the surface, to the safe, predictable conversations. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I get a message. It's always from a new profile, with no picture and no bio. The message is always the same. The liminal is waiting for you. I delete the message, block the user, and try to go back to sleep. But I can't shake the feeling that Elias is still out there, watching me, waiting for me to return to the other side, waiting for me to embrace the darkness. And sometimes I wonder if I should. Maybe the liminal is where I truly belong. Maybe the only way to escape the fear is to surrender to it. I haven't made any real friends since then. I have had fleeting encounters with many, and I can see the sadness in their eyes. Eyes like the portraits in the old caretaker's home. I don't know what happens if I see him again. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, but I don't think I ever will. Some things are just beyond explanation. Some doors are better left unopened. And some connections, no matter how enticing, are best left unmade. Even on Tinder. Especially on Tinder. I see the shadow of him, sometimes in my dreams, and it is getting harder to forget. I hope I never see him again. I used to think I had a pretty good radar for creeps. Years of online dating, countless awkward encounters, and a healthy dose of feminist theory had, in my mind, equipped me with the tools to navigate the treacherous waters of Tinder. I was confident, savvy, and definitely not the kind of girl who'd fall for some smooth-talking predator. Turns out, confidence is a hell of a drug. And creeps? They're always evolving. I'd been on Tinder for a solid 3 months after a particularly brutal breakup. The usual drill, swiping through a sea of gym selfies, vaguely witty bios, and guys holding fish. It was mostly a distraction, a way to feel like I wasn't completely invisible. I went on a few dates, the kind where you spend most of the time mentally calculating how long you need to stay to be polite. But nothing clicked. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was different. No gym selfies, no fish. Instead, there were pictures of him hiking in the mountains, volunteering at an animal shelter, and playing guitar around a campfire. His bio was short and sweet. Lover of adventure, good coffee, and deep conversations. Okay, maybe a little cliché, but still miles ahead of the competition. We started chatting, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and his genuine interest in getting to know me. He asked about my dreams, my fears, my favorite books. It felt like we were having the kind of conversations I usually only had with my closest friends. He was articulate, thoughtful, and, let's be honest, incredibly attractive. He had these piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me, and a smile that could melt glaciers. We met for coffee a few days later, and the chemistry was undeniable. He was even more charming in person, with a disarming vulnerability that made me feel instantly comfortable. We talked for hours, losing track of time as we shared stories and laughed. It felt like I had known him forever. Over the next few weeks, Liam became a constant presence in my life. We went on hikes, explored hidden cafes, and spent evenings curled up on my couch watching movies. He was attentive, supportive, and always made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Looking back, there were subtle red flags, little things that should have raised alarm bells, but I was so caught up in the whirlwind romance that I brushed them aside. He was always a little too eager, a little too intense. He'd shower me with compliments and declarations of love early on, which felt flattering at first, but eventually started to feel suffocating. He'd get jealous if I mentioned spending time with other people, even just friends, and he always wanted to know where I was and who I was with. I chalked it up to him being really into me. I mean, who wouldn't want to feel adored? Then came the gaslighting. It started small, with him subtly questioning my memory of events, making me doubt my own perceptions. Are you sure that's what happened? I remember it differently. Or, you're being too sensitive. I was just joking. Over time, the gaslighting became more frequent and more insidious. He'd accuse me of flirting with other guys, even when I was just being friendly. He'd criticize my appearance, telling me I looked tired or that my outfit wasn't flattering. He'd undermine my accomplishments, telling me I only got where I was because of luck, not talent. I started to question my own sanity. Was I really being too sensitive? Was I imagining things? Was I the problem? The isolation followed. Liam started to subtly isolate me from my friends and family. He'd make excuses for why I couldn't see them, or he'd complain about them behind their backs, planting seeds of doubt in my mind. He'd tell me they didn't understand me, that they were jealous of our relationship. I started spending less and less time with the people I cared about, relying more and more on Liam for validation and support. He became my entire world. It wasn't until one night, a few months into our relationship, that I realized the true extent of the danger I was in. We were at a party, a birthday celebration for one of my friends. Liam was being unusually possessive, hovering around me like a guard dog, glaring at anyone who dared to talk to me. I tried to brush it off, but his behavior was making me increasingly uncomfortable. Later in the evening, I went to the bathroom. When I came out, Liam was waiting for me, his face flushed with anger. "Who are you talking to?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "Just Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. "What's wrong?" "Don't lie to me," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "I saw you flirting with that guy from work." "I wasn't flirting," I protested, trying to pull away. "We were just talking." "You're lying," he screamed, his grip tightening on my arm. "You're always lying." He dragged me out of the party, ignoring my pleas to stop. He shoved me into his car and sped off, driving recklessly through the city streets. I was terrified. I had never seen him like this before. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Home," he snarled. "Where you belong." When we got back to my apartment, he pushed me inside and slammed the door shut. He cornered me in the living room, his eyes burning with rage. "You think you can just flirt with other guys and get away with it?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You think I'm stupid?" "Please, Liam, just calm down," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "You're scaring me." "I should be scaring you," he said, stepping closer. "You need to learn your lesson." He raised his hand, and I flinched, bracing myself for the blow. But it never came. Instead, he lowered his hand and smiled, a chillingly sinister smile. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice suddenly calm and soothing. "I just want you to understand how much I love you, and how much it hurts when you betray me." He reached out and gently stroked my cheek, his touch sending shivers down my spine. "I'm doing this because I love you," he whispered. "You need to understand that." In that moment, I realized the full extent of his manipulation. He wasn't just jealous or possessive. He was controlling, abusive, and completely detached from reality. I wasn't in a relationship. I was a prisoner. Somehow, I managed to keep my composure. I knew that if I panicked or showed any sign of defiance, things could escalate quickly. "I understand," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry." I won't do it again. He seemed satisfied with my response. He pulled me into a tight embrace, his grip suffocating. "That's my girl," he said, kissing my forehead. "I knew you'd come around." I spent the rest of the night in a state of frozen terror, pretending to be the loving, obedient girlfriend he wanted me to be. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't know how. The next morning, as soon as he left for work, I packed a bag and fled. I went straight to my best friend's house and told her everything. She was shocked and horrified, but she immediately offered me her support. Together, we contacted the police and filed a restraining order against Liam. I moved in with my friend for a few weeks while I figured out my next steps. It took months of therapy and support from my loved ones to recover from the emotional trauma of the relationship. I learned to recognize the red flags of abuse and to trust my instincts. I learned that love shouldn't feel like a prison and that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. Looking back, I'm still haunted by the memory of Liam's chilling smile that night. It's a reminder of how easily manipulation can mask itself as love and how important it is to be vigilant. I realized the danger I was in when his actions didn't line up with his words. I never went back on Tinder after that. Be careful. I'm usually a pretty rational person. I believe in logic, science, and generally looking before you leap. But sometimes, even the most grounded people can get swept up in something unexpected. This is the story of how Tinder almost cost me everything. It started innocently enough. I was freshly single, a little lonely, and all my friends were on the app. "It's just for fun," they'd said. "You might meet someone cool," they'd insisted. So, after weeks of resisting, I caved. I crafted a profile with a carefully curated selection of photos, hiking shots, a picture with my dog, a semi-candid one from a friend's party where I looked reasonably attractive. My bio was witty, self-deprecating, and hinted at my love for obscure indie films. Standard stuff. The matches started rolling in almost immediately. Most were duds, generic messages, blatant come-ons, or profiles filled with gym selfies. But then there was Liam. His profile was different. Thoughtful quotes in the bio, pictures of him traveling in far-off places, and a genuine smile that seemed to radiate warmth. We matched, and he messaged me almost instantly. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about books, music, our shared love for Thai food, and our mutual frustration with the current political climate. He was articulate, intelligent, and surprisingly funny. He wasn't pushy or overly flirtatious, which was a refreshing change. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me was still wary of meeting strangers from the internet, but the other part was genuinely excited. He seemed different, somehow. We decided on a coffee shop in a busy part of town. I made sure to tell a friend where I was going and what time I expected to be back. I even sent her a picture of Liam's profile, just in case. I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early, my stomach doing nervous flip-flops. I spotted him almost immediately. He looked exactly like his pictures, maybe even better in person. He stood up when he saw me, gave me a warm hug, and the nervousness melted away. The date went perfectly. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He was even more charming and intelligent in person. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We closed down the coffee shop and ended up taking a walk through the park, talking until the streetlights came on. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Dates turned into sleepovers, which turned into weekend trips. He was everything I thought I wanted: kind, funny, adventurous, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. He introduced me to his friends, and I introduced him to mine. Everyone seemed to like him, and I felt like I was finally building a real connection with someone. But then, little things started to happen. Small things, easily explainable, but things that started to make me feel uneasy. The first thing I noticed was his phone. He was always on it, constantly texting or browsing. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone's glued to their phones these days, right? But then I noticed he'd always angle the screen away from me when he was using it, and he'd get visibly flustered if I glanced at it accidentally. Then there were the late-night phone calls. He'd often get calls in the middle of the night, and he'd always step out of the room to take them. When I asked who was calling, he'd brush it off, saying it was just work or a friend in a different time zone. The biggest red flag, though, was his possessiveness. It started subtly, with him asking about my plans and who I was spending time with. But it gradually escalated into him questioning my every move, getting jealous when I spent time with my friends, and even trying to control what I wore. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd always deny it, saying I was being paranoid or insecure. He'd turn the blame back on me, making me feel like I was the one who was being unreasonable. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he was the person I thought he was, the person I fell in love with. One evening, I decided to surprise him at his apartment after work. I had a key he'd given me a few weeks earlier, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. When I arrived, the door was unlocked. I walked inside, calling out his name. There was no answer. I wandered through the apartment, noticing things I hadn't seen before. A stack of old notebooks hidden under the coffee table, a collection of photographs tucked away in a drawer. I picked up one of the notebooks and opened it. The pages were filled with his handwriting, but it wasn't the handwriting I recognized. It was jagged, erratic, and filled with disturbing thoughts and violent fantasies. I slammed the notebook shut and grabbed one of the photographs. It was a picture of me, taken without my knowledge. There were more pictures, all of me, taken at different times and in different places. Some were from our dates, others were from when I was alone, walking down the street or sitting in a park. That's when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw Liam standing in the doorway, his face contorted in a way I'd never seen before. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with cold, empty eyes. I knew, in that moment, that I was in danger. I dropped the photographs and backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. He took a step closer, and I ran. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and out into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached a crowded intersection. I pulled out my phone and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. They arrived quickly and took me to the station, where I gave them a statement. They searched Liam's apartment and found more disturbing evidence, weapons, surveillance equipment, and a detailed plan outlining how he intended to control me. They arrested him, and he was eventually charged with stalking, harassment, and making threats. The trial was a nightmare. I had to relive the whole experience, recounting every detail of our relationship and the events leading up to his arrest. He sat there in court, staring at me with the same cold, empty eyes. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to several years in prison. But even now, knowing that he's behind bars, I still can't shake the feeling of unease. I still have nightmares about him, about his apartment, about the photographs. I deactivated my Tinder account and haven't used dating apps since. I'm slowly starting to rebuild my life, but the experience has changed me. I'm more cautious, more guarded, and less trusting of people I meet online. It's a reminder that behind the carefully curated profiles and charming messages, there can be something else lurking. Something dark, something dangerous, something that can change your life forever. Looking back, I see all the red flags I ignored, all the warning signs I dismissed. I was so caught up in the idea of finding love that I blinded myself to the truth. I let my guard down, and I almost paid the ultimate price. I'm sharing my story not to scare people away from online dating, but to encourage them to be more cautious, more aware, and more trusting of their instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it. Listen to your gut, and don't be afraid to walk away. Your safety and well-being are more important than any potential relationship. I consider myself lucky to be alive. I know that things could have ended much differently. This experience taught me a valuable lesson, that you can never truly know someone, no matter how well you think you do. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, honestly. I mean, who wants to admit they fell for something so cliché, so easily avoidable? But it happened, and it messed me up more than I care to admit. It all started, like so many of these stories do, on Tinder. I was in my mid-20s, recently single, and feeling that familiar mix of loneliness and boredom. My friends were all coupled up, and I was tired of being the third wheel. So, against my better judgment, I downloaded the app and dove in. At first, it was just mindless swiping. A few awkward conversations, a couple of terrible dates, the usual Tinder experience. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was intriguing. He was handsome, definitely my type, with these piercing blue eyes and a disarming smile. His bio was short and sweet, looking for someone to explore the city with. Let's get lost. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. He was funny, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything: our favorite books, our dream travel destinations, our biggest fears. He even remembered little details from our previous conversations, which was a refreshing change from the usual one-word replies I was used to. After a few days of constant texting, we decided to meet up. He suggested a small, cozy bookstore cafe in my neighborhood. I was a little nervous, but also excited. I hadn't felt this spark with someone in a long time. When I saw him waiting for me, standing by the window with a book in his hand, I felt a rush of something. Relief? Anticipation? I don't know, but I was definitely drawn to him. The date went perfectly. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He was even more charming in person than he was online. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, and he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He walked me home, and we shared a hesitant, awkward but sweet kiss at my doorstep. I went inside feeling like I was floating on air. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Weekends spent exploring hidden corners of the city, cozy nights and watching movies, long walks in the park holding hands. It felt easy, natural, like we had known each other forever. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: kind, thoughtful, adventurous, and incredibly attractive. My friends were even impressed, saying they hadn't seen me this happy in years. But then, subtle things started to change. Little inconsistencies, red flags that I ignored because I was too caught up in the whirlwind of it all. He started being vague about his job, saying he worked in finance, but never giving me any specifics. He was always hesitant to talk about his family, deflecting the conversation with a joke or a change of subject. And he was incredibly private about his phone. He never left it unattended, and he always angled the screen away from me when he was using it. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he just valued his privacy. Maybe he had a complicated relationship with his family. But the feeling of unease kept growing, gnawing at the back of my mind. One night, we were at my apartment watching a movie. He went to the bathroom, leaving his phone on the coffee table. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest, and quickly scrolled through his recent messages. Nothing. Just a few texts from unknown numbers. But then I checked his Tinder profile. It was still active. My stomach dropped. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All the doubts, all the suspicions, came crashing down on me at once. He was still on Tinder, actively looking for other people. All the things he had said, all the promises he had made, felt like a lie. He came back from the bathroom, and I confronted him. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. He denied it at first, saying he hadn't used the app in weeks. But when I showed him the profile, he couldn't lie anymore. He admitted he was still talking to other women on Tinder. He said he wasn't looking for anything serious, that he just liked the attention. He tried to apologize, to explain himself, but I wasn't listening. I was too hurt, too angry, too betrayed. I kicked him out of my apartment that night. I blocked his number, deleted him from all my social media accounts, and tried to erase him from my life. But it wasn't that easy. The damage was done. It wasn't just the fact that he had lied to me, or that he was still on Tinder. It was the feeling of being so easily fooled. I had let my guard down. I had opened myself up to someone, and he had taken advantage of it. I felt stupid, naive, and utterly heartbroken. For weeks, I was a mess. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I replayed every conversation, every moment we had shared, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I blamed myself, wondering if I had been too clingy, too demanding, too something. My friends tried to be supportive, telling me I was better off without him, but it didn't help. I felt like I had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. It wasn't just a relationship. It was my faith in people, my ability to trust. Eventually, I started to heal. Slowly, painfully, but surely. I started focusing on myself, on my hobbies, on my friendships. I went back to therapy, and I talked through my feelings with a professional. I realized that his actions weren't a reflection of me, but of him. He was the one with the problem, not me. It's been a few years since then. I'm still single, and I'm still hesitant to use dating apps. The experience with Liam left a scar, a lingering fear of being hurt again. But I'm also more cautious, more aware of the red flags. I know now that it's okay to trust my gut, to walk away from something that doesn't feel right. I still think about Liam sometimes, I wonder if he ever thinks about me. I wonder if he's still using Tinder, still hurting people with his lies. But I don't dwell on it. I know that I'm stronger now, more resilient. I've learned that it's okay to be vulnerable, but it's also important to protect myself. And I've learned that sometimes the most charming people are the ones you should be the most wary of, that the person on the other side of the screen might not be who they seem, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is swipe left. I guess the messed up part about this whole story is I thought I was catfishing him. When I made the profile, I used pictures of some model, not to intentionally trick anyone, but I was going through a really low point, felt ugly, and wanted to see what it was like to be beautiful. He was way out of my league, so I wasn't going to show up to a date or anything. That's how I justified it. But one day, I just felt like I owed it to him. I sent him a picture of me, and he said he still wanted to meet up, and I was so shocked, I just went with it. I guess I thought because he was still active on Tinder, he wouldn't care that I wasn't the girl in the photos. The whole thing is just so messed up. Okay, buckle up, because this is a story I still can't believe is actually mine. It's a Tinder tale gone terribly wrong, a cautionary story about trusting profile pics and witty banter over common sense. I swear, I'm still trying to piece together how I let things get as far as they did. I was freshly single, reeling from a pretty brutal breakup, and my friends were all pushing me to get back out there. Of course, getting back out there in the 21st century meant downloading Tinder. I'd always been skeptical. Dating apps felt so artificial. But honestly, I was lonely and wanted a distraction. So, I created a profile, carefully selecting pictures that made me look reasonably attractive without screaming desperate. Wrote a bio that was equal parts funny and self-deprecating, and started swiping. For the most part, it was the usual Tinder experience. Endless streams of generic profiles, awkward conversations, and the occasional super like from someone who was clearly not my type. Then I matched with him. Liam. His profile was intriguing. Moody black and white photos, artistic shots of urban landscapes, and a bio that quoted some obscure poet I'd actually read in college. He seemed intelligent, creative, and definitely not like the typical swipe right, wanna hang kind of guy. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything: books, movies, music, our hopes, our fears. He even managed to make me laugh about the breakup, which I didn't think was possible at that point. After a week of almost constant messaging, he suggested we meet up. I was hesitant. I'd had my fair share of Tinder duds, and I was nervous about being disappointed again. But Liam was persistent, and I had to admit, I was really drawn to him. Plus, my friends kept chanting, "Just do it," with the enthusiasm of a Nike commercial. So I agreed. He suggested a small, independent bookstore cafe in a part of the city I wasn't super familiar with. It sounded charming and low-key, perfect for a first date. I told a couple of friends where I was going and what time I expected to be back. You know, the usual safety precautions. The day of the date, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, rereading our conversations, and mentally preparing myself for any possible scenario. When I finally arrived at the cafe, I was a sweaty, jittery mess. He was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, and he looked nothing like his pictures. I mean, he was still attractive, in a brooding, intense kind of way, but his photos had clearly been strategically angled and filtered to hide certain imperfections. He was older than I had initially thought. His face was more weathered, and he had this unsettling intensity in his eyes that I hadn't picked up on in the photos. But I'd already committed. I took a deep breath, plastered on a smile, and went over to introduce myself. The first hour was awkward. He was quiet, almost withdrawn, and didn't seem nearly as engaging as he had been online. He mostly asked questions about me, listening intently but offering little in return. It felt like an interrogation rather than a conversation. As the date progressed, he started to open up a bit, but his stories were strange. He talked about his fascination with true crime, his obsession with unsolved mysteries, and his belief that the world was full of hidden conspiracies. He spoke with such fervor that it was hard to tell if he was joking or completely serious. Then, he started asking about my apartment, not in a casual, "So, where do you live?" kind of way. He wanted specifics: what floor I was on, how many windows I had, what kind of security system I had, which, by the way, was none. He asked if I lived alone, if I had any roommates, if I had any pets. I started to feel really uncomfortable. My gut was screaming at me to end the date and get out of there, but I didn't want to be rude. Plus, a small part of me still held onto the hope that this was just a weird first impression, and he'd eventually relax and be the charming guy I'd been talking to online. Big mistake. After the cafe, he suggested we go for a walk. Again, I hesitated. It was getting dark, and I was definitely not feeling the date. But he was so insistent, and I was so determined to be polite, that I reluctantly agreed. We walked through the dimly lit streets, and he continued his rambling monologues about crime and conspiracy. He started talking about how easy it was to disappear in the city, how many people went missing every year without a trace, and how the police were too incompetent to solve most cases. The conversation took a darker and more personal turn. He started asking about my past, about the breakup I'd mentioned in our chats. He pried into the details, wanting to know everything. What went wrong? Who was at fault? How I was coping. I felt increasingly vulnerable and exposed. I tried to deflect, to change the subject, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept pressing, digging deeper, until I felt like I was reliving the entire breakup right there on the street. Then, he stopped walking and turned to face me. The street was deserted, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp. His eyes were intense, almost manic. He said, "You know, it's funny how people think they can just walk away from things, that they can just erase the past and start over. But the past always catches up, doesn't it?" His words were so loaded, so threatening, that I felt a surge of pure terror. I knew, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just a bad date. This was something far more dangerous. I stammered, "I think I should go." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes unblinking. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, not knowing where I was going, just wanted to get away from him. I could hear his footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I ran until I reached a busy street, filled with people and bright lights. I ducked into a crowded bar, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked back, but he wasn't there. I stayed in that bar for hours, too terrified to leave. I called my friends, told them everything that had happened, and begged them to come pick me up. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and anxiety. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and slept with a knife under my pillow. I deleted my Tinder profile and scrubbed my social media clean. I felt like I was being watched, followed, haunted by the memory of his intense gaze. I never saw Liam again, but the experience left a lasting scar. I'm still wary of online dating, still haunted by the realization that someone you meet through a seemingly harmless app can turn out to be your worst nightmare. I learned a hard lesson about trusting my instincts, about not being afraid to be rude, and about the importance of prioritizing my safety above all else. And I definitely learned to take Tinder profiles with a massive grain of salt, because behind that carefully curated image and witty bio, there might be someone far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. It makes me wonder who I would ever talk to again in my life. It was something that I could never overcome.